What happens when a man's final cruel prophecy is shattered in the most spectacular way imaginable? For Emma Vance, the final words her celebrity ex-husband, Julian Thorne, ever spoke to her were a curse. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. You will die alone." He said it with the smug certainty of a man who believed he had authored her entire existence. But what Julian didn't count on, what the world couldn't have predicted, was that the universe had a flair for irony. Less than 12 hours later, Emma Vance wouldn't just be fine. She'd be on the front page of every major news outlet, her name a global trending topic, all because of a single candid photograph, her hand held gently, securely in the hand of the world's most enigmatic and untouchable billionaire. This isn't just a story about revenge, it's about what happens the morning after your world ends. The air in the penthouse was cold. It wasn't the fault of the climate control, a state-of-the-art system Julian Thorne had often boasted about in interviews for architectural magazines. It was a frigid, soul-deep cold that emanated from the man himself. Julian, with his perfectly coiffed silver hair and a smile engineered for talk show sofas, stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the sparkling expanse of New York City, as if he owned it. In many ways, he thought he did. "It's all signed Emma," he said, not turning to look at her. His voice, the same one that calmed millions of his followers with platitudes about unlocking your inner power, was now clipped and sharp, a shard of glass. Emma Vance clutched the pen in her hand, her knuckles white. The final divorce paper sat on the vast marble island in the kitchen, a kitchen she had designed from the veining in the stone to the specific shade of brushed brass on the handles. It was a space meant for warmth, for laughter, for the life she thought they were building. Now, it was just a stage for her public execution. "I know, Julian," she whispered. Her voice was hoarse. She hadn't slept in days. For 10 years, she had been Mrs. Thorne, the quiet, supportive wife of the self-help magnate Julian Thorne, author of the global bestseller The Architect of You. She had been the one who edited his manuscripts until 3 in the morning, who fact-checked his research, who coached him through his anxieties before every major speech. She had sacrificed her own burgeoning career as an academic, specializing in Renaissance art, to build his empire, believing his success was their success. The cracks had started as hairline fractures. His casual dismissal of her opinions, his gaslighting her memories of events, the way he'd subtly mock her in front of their influential friends. Then came the affairs which he'd explained away as the unfortunate but necessary burdens of a man of his stature. The final break came when she discovered he wasn't just having an affair. He had a long-term partner, a younger, more malleable version of herself, already installed in a condo he'd bought downtown. Good. He finally turned his eyes, sweeping over her with disdain. She wore a simple grey cashmere sweater and jeans, a stark contrast to his tailored Zegna suit. She felt like a ghost in her own home. "The movers will be here tomorrow for my remaining effects. Your things? Well, you don't have much, do you? I'll have them put in storage. You have 30 days to collect them." Every word was a calculated blow. He knew her things were mostly books, research papers, and sentimental items from her family, things that held no monetary value to him. "Where am I supposed to go, Julian?" She asked the question, tasting like ash. The penthouse was in his name. The bank accounts had been systematically drained into trusts she couldn't access. Her lawyer, a timid man overwhelmed by Julian's legal Rottweilers, had managed to secure her a settlement that was, in Julian's world, pocket change. It was enough to live on for a year, maybe two, if she was frugal. It was an insult disguised as a severance package. He smirked, a cruel twisting of the lips that never reached his televised eyes. "I don't know, Emma. That's your problem now, isn't it? You wanted to be independent. So be independent." He walked over to the island, picking up his pristine leather briefcase. He didn't even glance at her. He was already moving on. Tears pricked at her eyes, hot and shameful. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction. She straightened her back, lifting her chin. "I will." Her defiance seemed to amuse him. He paused at the door, turning back for one final devastating volley. His face was a mask of mock pity. "You know I almost feel sorry for you," he said, his voice dropping into the intimate conspiratorial tone he used on his podcasts. "You poured everything into me. You have no career, no connections of your own. You're, what, 36? Past your prime, darling. The world is a brutal place for women like you." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne suffocating her. He leaned in his voice, a venomous whisper in her ear. "Let me give you one last piece of free advice, my dear ex-wife. No one will ever want you. You're nothing without me. You carry the stench of failure. Men of quality, men of substance, they want a winner. They don't want someone's discarded leftovers. You will die alone." He pulled back, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. He had delivered his curse. It was the final brick in the wall he had built around her heart. And then he was gone. The heavy door clicked shut, the sound echoing in the cavernous empty space. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She just stood there, his words slithering into the cracks of her broken confidence. "No one will ever want you. You will die alone." She finally let out a ragged sob, collapsing against the cold marble. The city lights outside blurred into a cruel, glittering mockery. Julian was right. She had given him her youth, her intellect, her loyalty. And in return, he had taken her name, her home, her future, and left her with nothing but a curse ringing in her ears. In that moment, sitting alone in the ruins of her life, she believed him. The next few weeks were a blur of beige. Beige boxes, beige walls of a tiny third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn, and a beige, flavorless existence. Emma had found the apartment in a daze. It was all she could afford. The grand views of Central Park were replaced by a view of a brick wall and a perpetually overflowing dumpster. The scent of fresh orchids Julian insisted on was replaced by the smell of damp old wood and her neighbor's cooking. She unpacked the few boxes Julian's men hadn't accidentally misplaced. Her books, her precious companions, filled makeshift shelves. Her research notes on the artist Artemisia Gentileschi, a female painter who had triumphed over immense personal violation and patriarchal oppression, felt like a cruel joke. Emma had once dreamed of writing the definitive book on her. Now she could barely summon the energy to read the titles. Julian's curse echoed in the cramped space. "No one will ever want you." It became the soundtrack to her lonely nights. She'd scroll through social media, a masochistic ritual. Julian was thriving. He was photographed with A-list actors giving talks at prestigious conferences, and his new girlfriend, a model named Crystal, was splashed across his Instagram, always laughing, always perfect. He had already rewritten their history, painting himself as the patient husband who had finally freed himself from a negative and uninspiring partner. His followers lapped it up, flooding his comments with praise for his strength and authenticity. Emma's only lifeline was Chloe Davies. Chloe, a sharp-tongued, fiercely loyal art gallery owner, had been her friend since college. She'd never liked Julian, calling him a self-help vampire who drains the life out of everyone and sells it back to them in a paperback. Chloe showed up one Friday evening, armed with 2 bottles of expensive wine and a container of pad thai. She took one look at the apartment, and Emma's gaunt face and her expression hardened. "Okay, that's it," Chloe declared, setting the food on a wobbly IKEA table. "The moping is officially over. Operation Phoenix begins now." Emma gave a weak smile. "I don't feel much like a mythical bird, Chloe. More like a pigeon with a broken wing." "Nonsense," Chloe said, pouring a generous glass of Sancerre. "You are Emma Vance. You can spot a forged Botticelli from 20 paces, and you can recite Vasari's Lives of the Artists backwards. That sociopath didn't give you your brain. He just tried to convince you not to use it. We just need to remind you who you are." Chloe talked for hours, her voice filling the quiet apartment with life. She spoke of new artists, of gallery openings, of the vibrant world that Emma had been cut off from. Slowly, tentatively, Emma found herself correcting a point Chloe made about the use of lapis lazuli in the Scrovegni chapel, the old fire of her intellect flickering faintly. "See, she's still in there," Chloe said, pointing at her with a shrimp-laden fork. "Now for the main event." She reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was heavy, expensive. The calligraphy was elegant. "What's this?" Emma asked. "This," Chloe said with a flourish, "is your re-entry into the world. It's the St. Jude's Foundation Annual Benefit Gala, the biggest art world event of the fall. They're auctioning off a recently discovered Degas sketch. Everyone who is anyone will be there." Emma recoiled as if the envelope were on fire. "Chloe, no, I can't. What would I wear? Who would I talk to? Julian will be there. He's a patron." "First," Chloe said, ticking the points off on her fingers, "I have a friend at Marchesa who owes me a colossal favor. You will be dressed in a gown that will make angels weep. Second, you will talk to me. And third, screw Julian. Seeing you there looking magnificent and not giving a damn about him will be like a stake through his narcissistic heart. It's the perfect revenge." "I don't want revenge, Chloe. I just want to be invisible." "Too bad," Chloe countered. "Invisibility is cancelled. You've spent a decade in the shadows. It's time to stand in the light. Not for him, not for anyone else. For you. Remember the woman who wanted to write the Gentileschi book? The one who was passionate and brilliant? She wouldn't hide from a bully in a bespoke suit. She'd face him." Emma looked at the invitation. The St. Jude's Foundation. The very name felt like a sign. She thought of Julian's parting words, the poison of his curse. "You will die alone." Maybe he was right. Or maybe, just maybe, Chloe was. Maybe the only way to break a curse was to defy it. She took a deep breath, the first one that felt like it reached the bottom of her lungs in months. "Okay," she said, her voice stronger than it had been all evening. "Okay, I'll go." Chloe's smile was triumphant. "That's my girl. Now let's finish this wine. We have a phoenix to raise from the ashes." The ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was a galaxy of glittering chandeliers and even more glittering people. The air hummed with the low thrum of powerful conversations, scented with expensive perfume and ambition. Emma felt a wave of vertigo. For years, she had navigated these events at Julian's side, a silent accessory. Tonight, she was on her own, and it was terrifying. Chloe, true to her word, had worked magic. The Marchesa gown was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk that shimmered with every movement. It was elegant, understated, and fit her as if it were spun just for her. Her hair was swept up in a loose romantic chignon, and for the first time in a long time, the woman staring back at her from the reflection in a champagne flute looked not like a victim, but like herself. "Stop hiding behind the ficus," Chloe hissed, pulling her gently by the arm. "You look like a goddess. Own it." They circulated Chloe, greeting people with air kisses and sharp witticisms. Emma managed a few polite smiles, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. She kept scanning the crowd for Julian, a primal sense of dread coiling in her stomach. The auction began. The auctioneer, a man with a plummy British accent and a theatrical flair, charmed the room into parting with extraordinary sums of money for art vacations and experiences. Emma found herself genuinely captivated by the art, her professional eye assessing the works, her mind momentarily distracted from her anxiety. The main event was the Degas sketch, a delicate, intimate drawing of a ballerina tying her shoe. Bidding was fierce, paddles shooting up across the room. Emma watched mesmerized when she saw him. Julian. He was sitting at a prominent front table, his arm possessively around Crystal's chair, his paddle held high. He wanted the Degas. Of course he did. It was a trophy. Emma felt a chill and turned away, needing to escape. "I need some air," she murmured to Chloe, slipping away from their table towards a set of French doors that led to a small, secluded terrace. The cool night air was a balm. The terrace was blessedly empty, overlooking a quiet courtyard garden. She leaned against the balustrade, closing her eyes, trying to will away the image of Julian's smug face. This was a mistake. She wasn't ready. "It's a beautiful piece, isn't it, the Degas?" The voice was deep, calm, and startlingly close. Emma's eyes snapped open. A man was standing a few feet away, half hidden in the shadows, looking not at her, but out at the garden. He was tall, dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, but he wore it with a kind of casual indifference, as if it were a second skin. "Yes," Emma found herself saying, her voice a little breathless. His use of line, "It's so economical, but it captures the entire weight and strain of the moment. It's not just a pretty picture." The man turned his head slightly, and she caught a glimpse of his profile in the dim light. Strong jaw, thoughtful eyes, an air of quiet intensity that was the polar opposite of Julian's performative charisma. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't place it. "Most people just see the ballerina," he said, his gaze now on her. His eyes were a startling shade of grey, like a stormy sea. "You see the work." A blush rose on her cheeks. It was the first time in years anyone had seen her, and not the woman standing next to Julian Thorne. I studied art history. It was my field." Was he asked, a note of genuine curiosity in his voice? Is she corrected herself, a spark of her old self igniting? "It is my field." He smiled, a small, genuine smile that transformed his serious face. "Good." An awkward, yet not uncomfortable silence fell between them. From inside, they could hear the auctioneer's voice rising to a crescendo. "Sold to Mr. Julian Thorne." Emma flinched, the sound of his name a physical blow. She wrapped her arms around herself, the cold returning. The stranger's perceptive eyes missed nothing. "You know him," he stated. It wasn't a question. She gave a wry, bitter laugh. "He's my ex-husband. The divorce was finalized yesterday." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She instantly regretted it. Why was she dumping her baggage on this handsome stranger? But he didn't recoil or offer empty platitudes. He just nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, and it sounded like he actually meant for the turmoil, not for the divorce itself. She shook her head, trying to dismiss it. "It's fine. I should go back inside." "Wait," he said, taking a step closer. The space between them seemed to crackle with an unexpected energy. "My name is Alistair." He extended his hand. She placed hers in it. His grip was warm, firm, and surprisingly gentle. A jolt, like a static shock, shot up her arm. "Emma," she replied. "Emma," he repeated, as if testing the name on his tongue. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Emma, who sees the work." He held her hand for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. As she turned to walk back inside, her heart doing a strange, unfamiliar flutter, he spoke again, his voice soft. "For what it's worth, he didn't deserve that sketch. He only sees the ballerina." Emma walked back into the ballroom, her mind reeling. She didn't see the rest of the auction. She didn't even notice when Chloe returned to the table. She was consumed by the brief, intense connection with the man on the terrace, Alistair. As the gala wound down, Chloe helped her navigate the exit. They were waiting for their car when a flurry of activity erupted near the main entrance. A swarm of paparazzi, who had been waiting for a politician to leave, suddenly turned their lenses towards the doors. Alistair emerged. And suddenly, Emma understood. The flashes were blinding. Shouts of his name echoed in the night. Alistair Sterling. The Alistair Sterling. The reclusive tech billionaire. The prodigy who had made his fortune in sustainable energy and now ran the Sterling Foundation, one of the world's largest philanthropic organizations. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence here was a major event. He seemed unfazed by the chaos, his expression impassive, as his security team tried to clear a path. His gaze swept the crowd, and for a heart-stopping moment, his eyes met Emma's. There was a flicker of recognition, a ghost of the smile she'd seen on the terrace. Chloe was gaping. "Oh my God, you were talking to Alistair Sterling, the great white whale of the Forbes list." Before Emma could answer, the crowd surged. A clumsy photographer stumbled backward, bumping into Emma and sending her off balance. She gasped, expecting to fall, but a strong hand shot out and caught her arm, steadying her. Another hand instinctively found hers, lacing their fingers together in a firm, protective grip. It was Alistair. He had broken from his security cordon and was suddenly right there, his body shielding hers from the jostling crowd. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and concerned, meant only for her. She could only nod, speechless. The world seemed to slow down. The roar of the paparazzi, the shouting, it all faded into a dull hum. All she could feel was the warmth of his hand, the solid presence of him next to her. It lasted only for a few seconds. His security team quickly enveloped them, guiding them towards a waiting black sedan, a car far more imposing than the Uber they had called. He opened the back door, still holding her hand, and looked at her. "Let me give you a ride," he said. It wasn't a request. Dumbly, she nodded again and slid into the plush leather interior. Chloe scrambled in after her, wide-eyed. Alistair followed, and the door shut with a heavy, satisfying thud, sealing them in a cocoon of silence. The car pulled away from the curb, leaving the flashing lights behind. Emma looked down. Her hand was still linked with his. Across the street, hidden in the shadows, a freelance paparazzo, who had missed the main scrum, lowered his camera. He hadn't gotten a clear shot of Sterling's face, but he'd gotten something else, something intimate and intriguing. A close-up of their hands perfectly intertwined, a story in a single frame. He smiled. This was better than a politician. This was gold. Emma woke up to the sound of a hurricane. Not a literal one, but the digital tempest of her phone vibrating violently on her bedside table. It buzzed and chirped with a relentless, frantic energy she'd never experienced before. Groggily, she reached for it, her mind still fuzzy from the surreal events of the previous night. Alistair's driver had dropped her and Chloe off, a polite and formal goodbye hanging in the air. The feeling of his hand in hers lingered like a phantom limb. She squinted at the screen. 347 new text messages, 98 missed calls, a torrent of notifications from Instagram, Twitter, and news apps she didn't even remember installing. Her blood ran cold. This was the kind of attention Julian received, not her. Her thumb trembled as she swiped to open a text from Chloe. It was a string of incoherent capital letters and a link. Chloe, Emma. Oh my God, holy Sikh, look at this now. With a deep sense of foreboding, she clicked the link. It took her to the homepage of TMZ. And there it was. The lead story. The photograph. It was an artful shot, tightly framed and undeniable. Two hands. Her hand, recognizable by the delicate silver ring her grandmother had left her, was entwined with a man's larger, stronger hand. The cuff of a tuxedo and a sliver of an impossibly expensive-looking watch were visible. The headline screamed, "Mystery Woman, Reclusive Billionaire, Alistair Sterling, in Shockingly Public Romance." She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She scrambled to open other news sites. Page 6. The Daily Mail, Vanity Fair. It was everywhere. The same photo. The same breathless speculation. Who is Alistair Sterling's secret girlfriend? The handhold seen round the world. Sources say the woman is a stunning brunette who spent the evening at the St. Jude's Gala with the tech mogul. She was the mystery woman, the stunning brunette. It felt like she was reading about a character in a novel, not herself. Then her stomach dropped as she saw the comments section. The digital mob was already at work. Sleuths were trying to identify her. And then someone did. A gossip columnist with a long memory posted a picture of her from 3 years ago standing behind Julian at a book launch. The narrative shifted with whiplash speed. Update: Sterling's mystery woman, identified as Emma Vance, ex-wife of self-help guru Julian Thorne. And that's when the second storm hit. Julian's storm. He hadn't waited. He hadn't stayed silent. He had gone on the offensive with brutal surgical precision. He posted a statement on his Instagram, a platform with 20 million followers. It was a masterclass in manipulation, cloaked in his signature brand of faux vulnerability. The post was a picture of him looking pensively out a window, a cup of tea in his hands. The caption began, "Friends, many of you have been asking me about the recent news. It is with a heavy heart that I must address this. As you know, I have recently gone through a painful and private separation. I have tried to handle this with dignity and grace, wishing only the best for Emma. To see these photos today is deeply concerning." Emma felt sick. Concerned, I have always been a supporter of Emma, even as we grew apart. But I fear she is in a vulnerable place right now. To see her latch onto a man of such immense wealth and power so quickly, literally the day after our divorce was finalized, is alarming. I pray that she is not being taken advantage of, and that this is not a cry for help or a desperate attempt to fill a void. I am worried for her well-being. I will be making no further comment on this matter, as I wish to focus on healing. Please send her your positive energy. It was diabolical. In one fell swoop, he had painted her as a mentally unstable, desperate gold digger. He was the concerned, sensitive ex-husband. She was the pathetic, grasping woman. He had co-opted the language of therapy and wellness, a language she had helped him perfect, and turned it into a weapon against her. The comments were a tidal wave of vitriol aimed squarely at her. Wow, she didn't waste any time, did she? Gold digger alert. Poor Julian. He's so classy. She's clearly a mess. I knew there was a reason he left her. She sounds like a parasite. Hope Alistair Sterling sees her for what she is. She's just using him for his money. The curse. You're nothing without me. No one will ever want you. He was making it come true, not by magic, but by the brute force of public opinion. He was branding her, defining her for the entire world, before she could even speak a word in her own defense. Her tiny apartment felt like it was closing in on her. The brick wall outside was a prison. She curled into a ball on her bed, the phone lying face down on the floor, still buzzing, still spewing poison. The shame was suffocating. He had won. He had utterly, completely destroyed her. She had defied his curse for one night, and in return, he had unleashed hell. The tears she had held back for so long finally came not as a gentle rain, but as a racking, hopeless storm. The knocking was soft at first, then more insistent. Emma ignored it, pulling a pillow over her head to block out the world. It was probably a reporter or a process server with a cease and desist letter from Julian's lawyers for besmirching his good name. Emma, it's Chloe. Open this door right now, or I'm calling the fire department and telling them I smell gas and a crazy woman with a vintage toaster. Reluctantly, Emma dragged herself to the door and unbolted it. Chloe swept in her face a mixture of fury and concern. She was holding a large bag from a fancy bakery and the morning papers, which she promptly threw in the trash. Don't read that garbage, she ordered. I've already seen it. That man is not a human being. He's a sentient, weaponized press release. Chloe took in Emma's tear-streaked face and crumpled form, and her expression softened. Oh, honey. She enveloped Emma in a hug. Don't you let him do this to you. Don't you let him win. He already has Chloe, Emma croaked. Look at what they're saying. The whole world thinks I'm some desperate, grasping social climber. He knew exactly what he was doing. Of course he did. Chloe said, her voice steely. This is his playbook. Control the narrative. Isolate the target. Publicly humiliate. He did it to that journalist who wrote a critical profile of him 2 years ago. Remember? He's a predator. Just then, Emma's intercom buzzed, making them both jump. Emma stared at it in terror. Don't answer it, she whispered. It could be the pizza I ordered for moral support, Chloe said, trying to lighten the mood. She pressed the button. Who is it? A calm, male voice, devoid of static, came through the speaker. It's Alistair Sterling. For Emma Vance. Emma and Chloe froze, staring at each other in disbelief. Alistair Sterling. Here, at her third-floor walk-up in Brooklyn. Let him in, Chloe hissed, suddenly galvanized. For God's sake, Emma, buzz him in. In a daze, Emma pressed the button. A few moments later, there was a quiet knock on her apartment door. She opened it to find him standing there. He was dressed not in a tuxedo, but in dark jeans, a simple gray t-shirt, and a lightweight jacket. He looked younger, less intimidating, but the same quiet intensity radiated from him. He was holding a small, unassuming cardboard box. Miss Vance. Emma, he said, his grey eyes searching her face. He saw the tear tracks, the fear. His expression wasn't one of pity, but of a kind of grim understanding. I know this is an intrusion. May I come in? She could only nod, stepping aside. He walked into her tiny living room, his presence making the space feel both smaller and safer at the same time. He glanced around at the bookshelves, his eyes lingering on the titles. "I came to apologize," he said, turning back to her. "My presence last night and my carelessness brought this circus upon you. I am truly sorry for that." "It's not your fault," Emma said, finding her voice. "It's his. It's my world that has invaded yours," Alistair countered. "And I have some experience with this, which is why I'm here." He placed the box he was carrying on her coffee table. "This is for you." She opened it cautiously. Inside was a sleek silver device. "It's a secure, encrypted satellite phone," he explained. "Untraceable, unhackable. My personal number is the only one programmed into it. Your current phone is a liability. The press can track it. It can be hacked. This is safe." Emma stared at him, bewildered by the practicality and foresight of the gesture. "I also saw his statement." Alistair continued, his voice hardening almost imperceptibly. "It was a cowardly and calculated attack. He is attempting to define you before you have a chance to define yourself. I will not allow that to happen." Chloe, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway like it was a tennis match, finally spoke up. "Damn right. But how do we fight back? He has 20 million followers who think he's the second coming." Alistair met Chloe's gaze, giving her a nod of respect. "You don't fight him on his battlefield. You don't sling mud. You render his attacks irrelevant by telling the truth, but on your own terms." He looked back at Emma, his focus entirely on her. "He's accused you of being a gold digger. So we show them you have no interest in my money. He's painted you as unstable. So we show them your strength and intelligence." A spark of anger, hot and clean, finally burned through Emma's despair. "He built his entire empire on my work." The words hung in the air. Alistair's expression sharpened. "What do you mean, his book?" Emma said, the story pouring out of her now. "The Architect of You. It was supposed to be my book. My dissertation was on the philosophical concept of the self in Renaissance art, how artists and thinkers of the time constructed their public and private personas. It was about authenticity, legacy, building a life of substance. I had a manuscript, years of research. Julian, he took it. He read it, simplified it, stripped out all the academic nuance, and repackaged it with pop psychology buzzwords. He stole my soul and sold it as a self-help guide." Chloe looked horrified. "Emma, you never told me it was that direct." "I was ashamed," Emma admitted. "And he convinced me that no one would ever believe me, that it was our project." Alistair was silent for a long moment, his jaw tight. He looked from the pain in Emma's face to the bookshelves crammed with her life's passion. "Do you have proof?" he asked quietly. "Drafts, notes, emails." Emma's heart leaped. "Yes, they're in storage, old laptops, boxes of notes. I have everything." Alistair's expression was now one of cold, clear purpose. He was no longer just a handsome stranger or a reclusive billionaire. He was an ally, a powerful one. "Then we have a new plan," he said. "We are no longer on the defensive. He wrote that he's concerned about you. Let's give him something to be genuinely concerned about." He looked directly at Emma, and for the first time, she saw not just kindness, but a deep, formidable strength that he was offering to share. "He tried to take your voice, Emma. I think it's time the world finally heard it." The next week was a whirlwind of covert operations and quiet strategy orchestrated from Alistair Sterling's minimalist Soho office, a place that felt more like a modern art gallery than a corporate headquarters. There were no reporters outside, no paparazzi. Alistair's world was protected by a level of security and discretion that was an art form in itself. His team, a small group of fiercely loyal and terrifyingly competent individuals, retrieved Emma's boxes from storage. They worked with a forensic IT specialist who recovered every draft, every time-stamped note, every email exchange from her old hard drives. They laid it all out on a large conference table, a mountain of evidence that traced the intellectual genesis of the architect of you directly and unequivocally to Emma. There were her early manuscripts full of complex academic arguments next to Julian's later dumbed-down versions with his handwritten notes in the margins changing her phrasing into marketable sound bites. It was a clear and damning paper trail of intellectual theft. Seeing it all laid out, Emma felt a profound sense of validation, followed by a surge of cold fury. "He didn't just steal my words," she said to Alistair, her voice shaking with emotion. "He stole my entire thesis on life. And then he used it to lecture the world and me about authenticity." Alistair stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor. Over the past few days, their alliance had deepened into something more. They'd spent hours talking not just about Julian, but about everything. She learned about his own past with the media, a vicious, untrue story about his family that had made him retreat from public life years ago. He learned about her passion for Artemisia Gentileschi, and he listened, truly listened, with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she never had with Julian. A quiet, powerful intimacy was growing between them, forged in the crucible of their shared crisis. "He won't get away with it," Alistair said, his voice low and resolute. "Now, we need to choose our moment." The moment presented itself a few days later. An invitation arrived for Julian to be the keynote speaker at the Global Integrity Summit, a Davos-like conference for tech leaders and media personalities. His topic, dripping with irony, was truth and transparency in the digital age. "It's perfect," Chloe said, her eyes gleaming. "It's his home turf. He'll feel untouchable. The hubris will be off the charts. He'll have the whole event locked down," Emma countered, a knot of anxiety tightening in her stomach. "I can't just walk in and accuse him." "You won't have to," Alistair said. He tapped a few commands into his tablet. A picture of a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense haircut appeared on the screen. "This is Sarah Jenkins. She's moderating his keynote. She's one of the toughest investigative journalists in the business. She owes my foundation a favor for funding her documentary on dark money in politics. More importantly, she hates frauds." The plan was audacious. Sarah Jenkins, armed with a dossier of Emma's evidence, would conduct the Q&A after Julian's speech. She wouldn't ambush him with accusations. She would do it with his own words and with Emma's. The day of the summit, Emma felt sick with nerves. She wasn't at the conference hall. She was with Alistair and Chloe in a secure viewing suite nearby, watching the live feed on a massive screen. She had done her part. She had written a formal, eloquent statement and had given Sarah Jenkins her blessing to use her research, her words, her story. The broadcast began. There was Julian on a massive stage, bathed in a reverent blue light. He was at the peak of his powers, delivering a smooth, charismatic speech about the importance of living an authentic life. He even had the gall to reference his divorce. Recently, he said, his voice thick with false emotion, "I had to make a difficult choice to align my private life with my public values of honesty and growth. It was painful, but living your truth is never easy." Emma felt Alistair's hand find hers under the table. She gripped it tightly. Julian finished his speech to thunderous applause. He sat down beaming as Sarah Jenkins took the seat opposite him. She started with a few softball questions, lulling him into a state of comfortable arrogance. Then she shifted. Julian, your book, The Architect of You, is built on a very powerful central metaphor of constructing a life. It's incredibly detailed. I was curious about your research process. Julian preened. It was years of work, deep personal intellectual exploration. It really came from my soul. Interesting, Sarah said, looking down at her notes. Because I have here some academic papers from 2012, written by a then Emma Vance, that explore the exact same theme, the construction of persona in the Renaissance. The language is remarkably similar. For instance, you write, "To be authentic is to be the sole architect of your own reality." A fascinating turn of phrase. Almost identical to Ms. Vance's 2011 dissertation proposal, which states, "The Renaissance ideal was to be the sole architect of one's public reality." A flicker of panic in Julian's eyes. The audience murmured. Sarah pressed on her voice like ice. In Chapter 3, you discuss the facade of legacy, Ms. Vance's research uses the exact same term, the facade of legacy, in relation to the Medici family. On page 184, you use an anecdote about Michelangelo. That anecdote is lifted almost verbatim from an email Ms. Vance sent you in 2013, which we have a copy of. Shall I go on? The color drained from Julian's face. He was sputtering, trying to interrupt. This is an ambush. My work with my ex-wife was a collaboration. She was my partner. Was she a collaborator when you registered the copyright solely in your name? Sarah countered, her voice sharp. Was she a collaborator when you pocketed the entirety of the 8-figure advance? We spoke to your publisher. Her name is not mentioned on any contract. In fact, we have a statement from Ms. Vance herself. And then on the giant screen behind the stage, a picture of Emma appeared. Not a paparazzi shot, but a professional, dignified headshot they had taken days before. Beside it, her statement began to scroll. "I am not a victim or a gold digger," the statement read. "I am a scholar. The core concepts, the research, and the intellectual framework of The Architect of You were my work. I am proud of that work, and I will not allow it to be used to promote a false narrative of authenticity, nor to be used as a weapon to publicly shame me. The truth, as Mr. Thorne is so fond of saying, has a way of coming out." The room was in stunned silence. Julian Thorne, the great guru of truth, was staring at the screen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, live in front of his most important peers. He was being exposed not just as a liar, but as a thief. The cameras zoomed in on his face, no longer smug, but pale and sweating. The architect had been unmasked, revealing nothing but a hollow frame behind the beautiful facade. The reckoning had arrived. The silence in the conference hall was a living entity. It was thick, heavy, and absolute. On the massive screen, Julian Thorne's face, once a carefully curated mask of enlightened confidence, was now a canvas of pure, unfiltered horror. The camera operator, sensing a historic moment, held the close-up, refusing to cut away. The world watched as the Architect of You was publicly deconstructed beam by rotten beam. He didn't just look guilty, he looked erased. In the quiet viewing suite, the only sound was the sharp intake of Chloe's breath. Emma sat perfectly still, her hand held firmly in Alistair's. She wasn't watching Julian's face. She was watching the words on the screen. Her words, her truth, finally illuminated for all to see. It wasn't a feeling of triumph that washed over her, but one of profound, solemn relief, like a patient taking their first breath after a long and suffocating fever. The noise in her head, the constant echo of Julian's gaslighting, and her own self-doubt had finally ceased. Alistair squeezed her hand gently. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice low. Quiet, she whispered, a small, wondering smile touching her lips. "The storm. I think it's finally over." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture of profound respect. "No," he said, his grey eyes soft but resolute. "The storm is just beginning for him. For you, this is the dawn." The fallout was a digital tsunami. Before Julian could even be escorted off the stage by stunned event staff, the clip was being sliced, diced, and shared across every platform. Thorn Fraud, The Great Pretender, and his stand with Emma Vance exploded globally. The initial trickle of outrage became a flood. Celebrities who had once touted his book as their Bible posted hurried statements of condemnation. Brands that had sponsored his podcast issued press releases severing all ties. His publisher, facing a public relations nightmare, released a statement within 3 hours. "In light of new information regarding the authorship of The Architect of You, we are immediately suspending all promotion and distribution of the title and will be conducting a full review of our relationship with Mr. Thorne." It was corporate speak for a public execution. Crystal, his model girlfriend, quietly deleted every photo of him from her Instagram feed. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. The machine that had protected and promoted him turned on him with merciless efficiency. The final humiliating image came a week later, a grainy paparazzi photo of Julian unshaven and haggard in a wrinkled tracksuit, frantically putting trash bins out in front of his empty penthouse. The man who had preached about designing one's life looked like he had lost the blueprint to his own. Emma, however, refused to get drawn into the spectacle of his demise. While the world feasted on the schadenfreude she and Alistair were building, her new legal team, a phalanx of New York's sharpest minds funded by Alistair, moved with swift precision. The settlement meeting wasn't a negotiation. It was a dictation of terms. Emma sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, as her lawyers laid out the undeniable evidence of intellectual property theft and demanded reparations, not alimony, but a figure representing her share of the book's profits and damages for copyright infringement. Julian's legal team, knowing they were beaten, folded without a fight. With the first transfer of funds, she didn't buy a new apartment or a new wardrobe. Her first act was to sign the charter for the Vance Institute for Historical Studies. Its mission was clear: to fund and promote the work of scholars, particularly women, in fields historically dominated by men. Its first grant was awarded to a young art historian who had discovered compelling evidence that a famous sculpture attributed to a 17th-century master was in fact the work of his uncredited and forgotten sister. Her next meeting was with the acquisitions editor of a prestigious university press. The editor, a woman with kind eyes and a deep respect for academia, didn't just want to publish her original manuscript on Gentileschi. She wanted to publish a new expanded edition. "We also want you to write a new introduction," the editor said, "about your journey, about what it means to reclaim a narrative, your story. It's as important as the history you write about." For the first time, Emma cried. Not tears of sorrow or anger, but of overwhelming gratitude. Throughout it all, Alistair was her silent, steadfast partner. He never overshadowed her, never spoke for her. He simply created a space where she could be heard. Their relationship, born in the glare of a media firestorm, settled into a rhythm that was quiet, private, and deeply authentic. One evening, he came to her small Brooklyn apartment, the apartment she had decided to keep a reminder of, where she had started her new life. He found her covered in flour, attempting to bake bread, her tiny kitchen a chaotic mess. He didn't laugh at the mess. He simply rolled up the sleeves of his expensive shirt, washed his hands, and started helping her knead the dough. "You know," he said, his hands working alongside hers, "my life was very orderly before I met you. Every minute scheduled, every interaction vetted. I'm sorry for disrupting it," she said with a small smile. "Don't be," he replied, stopping to look at her, his eyes serious. "It was orderly, but it was grey. You brought the color back, Emma. You make the noise of the world bearable." A few months later, they stood on the terrace of his penthouse. It was a crisp autumn evening, and the city lights spread out below them like a carpet of fallen stars. The space, unlike Julian's cold, minimalist trophy home, was warm and lived in, filled with books stacked on every surface and art that was challenging and personal. He handed her an advance copy of her book, The Power of Persona Artemisia Gentileschi and the Forging of a Legacy, by Dr. Emma Vance. Her name, her title, her work. She ran her fingers over the embossed letters. "I used to stand in a place just like this and feel like the smallest person in the world," she confessed, her voice soft. "He told me that I was nothing without him, that I would die alone." Alistair wrapped his arms around her from behind, pulling her close. "He was a fool," he murmured into her hair. "A man that insecure could never understand a woman like you. He didn't understand the irony of his own curse." Emma leaned back against his chest, finally understanding. "He thought it was an ending," she said, a sense of wonder in her voice. "But it was a catalyst. If he hadn't said those things, if he hadn't pushed me out so cruelly, I would never have gone to that gala. I would never have met you. I would never have found the courage to fight for my work." Julian's curse wasn't a prophecy. It was an accidental gift. His attempt to consign her to oblivion was the very thing that had forced her into the light. He had meant to be the architect of her destruction, but instead, he had merely laid the foundation for her magnificent reconstruction. She turned in Alistair's arms, looking up at him. The love she saw in his eyes was not the possessive, conditional affection she had once known, but a deep, quiet partnership built on mutual respect and a shared truth. The city lights below no longer seemed to mock her, but to celebrate with her. It was a new dawn, bright and clear, and infinite with promise, and it was all hers. Emma Vance's story is a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's opinion, especially the opinion of those who try to diminish us. It's a testament to the fact that the end of one chapter, no matter how painful, is often the necessary prelude to a far better one. Her journey from a cursed ex-wife to a celebrated scholar, hand in hand, with a man who saw her for who she truly was, shows us that the most profound comebacks are rooted in reclaiming our own truth and our own voice. Julian's curse was meant to be her prison, but it became the key that unlocked her true potential.
The flashbulbs were a symphony of adoration, and Bentley Ashford was its conductor. Each blinding pop was a note of validation, a testament to his arrival. On his arm, Isabella Monroe was the perfect accessory, a goddess sculpted from victory and silk, her youth a vibrant contrast to the life he'd left behind. He smirked, the familiar curl of triumph on his lips. This wasn't just an awards night, it was his coronation. He had shed his past, his mousy, unassuming ex-wife, and emerged reborn in the crucible of public acclaim. Tonight, he would not only claim his trophy, but also show the world, and most importantly her, that leaving him was the greatest mistake of her life. He was the victor. He was the headline. The air in the grand ballroom of the Carlisle Hotel was thick with the scent of money, ambition, and expensive perfume. It was the night of the 85th Annual Golden Quill Awards, the most prestigious literary event of the year, where authors were treated like movie stars and words were weighed in gold. Bentley Ashford breathed it all in a deep, satisfying gulp of the atmosphere he now considered his birthright. His novel, Echoes of a Faded Dawn, was the literary darling of the season, a sprawling, melancholic masterpiece that critics had hailed as a once-in-a-generation voice. He was the frontrunner for the coveted fiction prize, the pinnacle of authorial achievement. He ran a hand over the lapel of his Tom Ford tuxedo, the fabric smooth and impossibly black. Beside him, Isabella squeezed his arm, her smile as bright and dazzling as the diamond necklace gracing her collarbone. "They're all looking at you, darling," she murmured, her voice a low, sultry purr. "Let them look," Bentley replied, his voice laced with a practiced, casual arrogance. He scanned the room, a king surveying his court. He saw Jonathan Franzen holding court in a corner, Zadie Smith engaged in animated conversation near the bar, and Stephen King, looking surprisingly unassuming, chatting with a group of publicists. These were his peers now. He belonged here. The past 18 months had been a whirlwind of calculated brilliance. He'd left Liliana, his wife of 12 years, with a single clinical conversation in their book-filled, slightly worn-out brownstone. The reason he'd given her was a cliché, wrapped in intellectualism. "We've diverged, Elle. Our creative and personal energies are no longer aligned." The truth, of course, was Isabella. He'd met her at a university guest lecture. She was a graduate student, 24 years old, with wide, adoring eyes and an insatiable appetite for the life he could offer. She saw him not as Bentley, the man who struggled with deadlines and left his socks on the floor, but as Bentley Ashford, the literary genius. She was a reflection of the man he wanted to be, and he'd chosen the reflection over the reality. Liliana had taken it with a quiet, devastating stillness that had unnerved him more than any screaming match would have. She had simply packed her bags, her face pale and her eyes hollow, and disappeared from his life. Their divorce was swift and quiet, handled by lawyers. He'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that she had moved out of New York, somewhere upstate, to find herself, or some other such nonsense. He pictured her in a small, sad cottage, surrounded by cats, growing bitter and irrelevant. The thought gave him a small, dark thrill of satisfaction. He had been the sun in their shared universe, and without him, she was surely just a cold, forgotten rock. "There's Charles Kensington from the New York Times," Isabella whispered, nudging him slightly. "He gave you that rave review. You should go say hello." "In a moment," Bentley said, his eyes still scanning. He was a shark, and this room was his ocean. Every handshake, every nod, every shared laugh was a strategic move. He was building his brand, cementing his legacy. The award tonight would be the final immutable stone in the foundation of his new life. He and Isabella began their slow, deliberate procession through the room. Hands were shaken, backs were slapped, compliments were exchanged like currency. Bentley was charming, witty, and self-deprecating, in just the right measure, a performance he had honed to perfection. Isabella was his silent, beautiful echo, smiling graciously, her presence a constant, glittering reminder of his virility and success. "Bentley, my boy," a booming voice called out. It was Arthur Mason, his former father-in-law, and ironically, the head of the Mason publishing house, which had not published Echoes of a Faded Dawn. Arthur was a man built like a bulldog, with a gruff exterior that hid a shrewd business mind. "Arthur," Bentley said, his smile tightening almost imperceptibly. "Good to see you." Arthur's eyes flickered to Isabella, a quick, dismissive glance before settling back on Bentley. Quite a night for you. I read the book. Powerful stuff. Thank you, Arthur. That means a lot. Yes, well, Arthur grunted, taking a sip of his scotch. It had a familiar rhythm to it, a certain cadence. Reminded me of some of Liliana's early prose, back when she used to write. Bentley felt a flash of ice in his veins. He forced a laugh. Liliana. Oh, she was a wonderful editor, a great first reader, but she never had the patience for the long haul. She was a sprinter, not a marathon runner. It was a line he'd used before. It neatly packaged Liliana's abandoned creative ambitions into a tidy, dismissible box. Arthur just grunted again, his gaze unreadable. Well, enjoy your night, Bentley. You've certainly worked hard to get here. The words were polite, but the tone felt like sandpaper. Arthur turned and walked away, leaving Bentley feeling strangely exposed. What was that about? Isabella asked, a slight frown marring her perfect brow. He seemed odd. He's old school, Bentley said, waving a dismissive hand. Still bitter I didn't sign with his house. And he's Liliana's father. Familial loyalty and all that. He quickly steered her toward the bar, eager to wash the taste of the encounter away with champagne. The lights in the ballroom began to dim, signaling that the ceremony was about to begin. Guests began to move towards their assigned tables. Bentley and Isabella were seated at a prime spot right near the stage, sharing a table with his agent, his publicist, and the editor-in-chief of a major magazine. The buzz in the room was electric, a collective hum of anticipation. Bentley felt his heart begin to beat a little faster. This was it, the culmination of everything. He reached under the table and squeezed Isabella's knee. She looked at him, her eyes shining. "You're going to win," she mouthed. He knew she was right. He leaned back in his chair, a picture of confidence, and allowed himself a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. He had it all: the woman, the fame, the masterpiece. He was untouchable. He thought for a fleeting second of Liliana in her sad little cottage. He hoped with a savage sort of pity that she was watching the live stream, that she was witnessing his ascent. He hoped it was destroying her. It was then that a subtle shift occurred in the room's atmosphere. A quiet murmur started near the grand entrance, a ripple that spread outwards table by table. Conversations faltered, heads turned. The focused energy of the room suddenly found a new, singular focal point. Bentley followed the collective gaze, annoyed at the interruption. What could possibly be more important than the start of the ceremony? And then he saw her. The doors were being held open by two staff members, and framed in the doorway was a woman. No, not just a woman. She was a vision. She wore a gown of midnight blue silk that seemed to drink the light falling from her shoulders in a cascade of liquid elegance. A constellation of sapphires and diamonds glittered at her throat. Her hair, which he remembered as a simple shoulder-length brown, was now a rich, dark auburn swept up in an intricate style that showcased the elegant line of her neck. But it was her face that made the air leave Bentley's lungs. The features were the same, but they were rearranged, sharpened by a confidence so profound it was almost a physical force. The hesitant uncertainty he had known was gone, replaced by a cool, placid serenity. Her smile was small, subtle, but it held a universe of secrets. It was Liliana. His Liliana. But it was not. It was a complete stranger, wearing his ex-wife's face. The room was filled with a stunned, reverent silence, punctuated by the frantic, sudden explosion of flashbulbs from the paparazzi who had scrambled back to the entrance. They had missed her on the red carpet, a cardinal sin they were now desperately trying to rectify. Bentley sat frozen, his champagne glass halfway to his lips. He felt Isabella stiffen beside him. Who is that?" she whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of awe and dawning apprehension. Bentley couldn't answer. His throat was a desert. His world, so perfectly constructed, so solid and certain just moments before, had developed a hairline crack. And then he saw the man whose hand she was holding. He was tall, dressed in a bespoke suit that was the epitome of understated power. His face was sharp, intelligent, with piercing grey eyes, and a stillness that commanded attention more than any boisterous display ever could. Bentley recognized him instantly, not from literary circles, but from the covers of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. It was Damien Blackwood, the Damien Blackwood, the reclusive, mysterious tech billionaire, the man who had revolutionized data encryption, who owned half of Silicon Valley, and whose net worth was a figure with so many zeros it seemed fictional. A man who never attended public events. Ever. And he was here at the Golden Quill Awards holding Liliana Mason's hand as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He leaned down and whispered something in her ear, and Liliana laughed. It wasn't the quiet, breathy laugh he remembered. It was a full, melodious sound that seemed to fill the sudden silence in the room. The crack in Bentley's world widened into a chasm. This was impossible. This was a hallucination. Liliana, his quiet, mousy, irrelevant Liliana with Damien Blackwood. The narrative he had so carefully written for himself, the story of his triumph and her lonely demise, had just been ripped to shreds in front of the entire world, and on the biggest night of his life. The maitre d', flustered and awed, rushed forward to greet the couple. As they were led into the room, every eye followed them. No one was looking at Bentley Ashford anymore. The conductor had lost his orchestra. The spotlight hadn't just moved, it had been stolen by a ghost from his past resurrected and shining with a brilliance he could never have imagined. The silence in the ballroom was a living thing, a palpable pressure that had replaced the earlier buzz of excitement. It was the kind of silence that follows a lightning strike when the world holds its breath, waiting for the thunder. Bentley felt it in his chest, a heavy, suffocating weight. His mind, usually a rapid-fire processor of wit and strategy, was a blank, static-filled screen. Liliana and Damien Blackwood moved through the room with an unhurried grace that only amplified their magnetic pull. They weren't just walking, they were gliding on a current of their own making. The whispers started then, a sibilant tide rising in their wake. "Is that Damien Blackwood? What is he doing here? And who is she? She's stunning. Wait, that's Liliana Mason, Bentley Ashford's ex-wife." That last exclamation, uttered by a well-known gossip columnist at a nearby table, was a gunshot in the quiet room. Heads swiveled from Liliana back to Bentley, their expressions a cocktail of shock, pity, and delicious Schadenfreude-fueled curiosity. Bentley felt hundreds of pairs of eyes on him, dissecting his reaction. He felt his face flush a hot, creeping tide of humiliation. He was no longer the man of the hour. He was a spectacle, a supporting character in a drama he hadn't known was being written. "Bentley," Isabella hissed, her voice sharp with panic. Her hand was gripping his thigh under the table, her nails digging into the fine wool of his trousers. "What is going on? Why is she here with him?" "I don't know." Bentley managed to choke out the words, tasting like ash. He took a gulp of his champagne, but it did nothing to quench the fire in his throat. The maitre d' was leading Liliana and Damien to a table. Not just any table. It was a specially prepared table for two, placed in a prime location that hadn't been there 10 minutes ago. It was a power move so blatant and yet so elegant that it was breathtaking. They hadn't come to fit into the evening. The evening was reforming around them. Damien pulled out Liliana's chair, a gesture of old-world courtesy that seemed utterly natural. As she sat, her midnight blue gown pooling around her, she let her gaze drift across the room. For a brief, heart-stopping moment, her eyes met Bentley's. There was no anger in her look, no hatred, no pain. There was something far worse, a calm, dispassionate assessment, the kind one might give to a piece of furniture or a distant, uninteresting memory. In that single glance, she dismissed 12 years of their shared life. She saw him, the man who had shattered her heart, and she looked right through him as if he were made of glass. Then she turned her attention to Damien, a warm, genuine smile gracing her lips, and Bentley Ashford ceased to exist for her. The thunder that followed the lightning strike was the collective exhale of the room, the immediate eruption of frantic, hushed conversation. Phones were already emerging from beneath tablecloths. The story of the night had irrevocably changed. It was no longer Bentley Ashford, literary genius poised to win, and it was now billionaire recluse Damien Blackwood makes shock public appearance with mystery woman, the ex-wife of his award-nominated rival. Bentley could already see the headlines, the salacious blog posts, the endless social media commentary. His publicist, a harried-looking woman named Chloe, leaned across the table, her face pale. Bentley, just stay calm. Don't react. We can manage this. Manage what? Bentley snapped, his voice louder than he intended. Manage the fact that my ex-wife just showed up with a man who could buy this entire hotel with his pocket change and is currently sucking all the oxygen out of the room. Keep your voice down, his agent, Marcus, cautioned, his eyes darting around nervously. This is a bad look, Bentley. A very bad look. Isabella was silent, her face a mask of confusion and betrayal. She had signed on to be the girlfriend of the triumphant victor, the star of the show. Instead, she was now the other woman, in a public humiliation. Her role had been downgraded from leading lady to a tawdry footnote. She looked from Bentley's angry, blotchy face to Liliana's serene, luminous one, and a flicker of something doubt, perhaps, or dawning comprehension crossed her features. The lights dimmed further, and a spotlight hit the stage. The host, a famous comedian known for his sharp wit, walked out to the podium. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Golden Quill Awards. We have a lot of literary talent in the room tonight, and apparently... He paused, letting his eyes drift pointedly towards Damien Blackwood's table. Some serious venture capital, too. I guess the rumor is true, the publishing industry really is looking for a new business model. A wave of laughter, slightly strained, rippled through the room. The host had acknowledged the elephant, and in doing so, had cemented its importance. Bentley wanted to slide under the table. He felt a bead of sweat trickle down his temple. The ceremony began, but the proceedings were a blur to Bentley. Awards were given for poetry, for biography, for debut novel. Winners gave heartfelt, emotional speeches, but the room's attention was divided. Every few minutes, a surreptitious glance would be thrown toward Liliana and Damien's table. They seemed oblivious, lost in their own world. They spoke quietly. He would occasionally reach across and touch her hand, and they shared a bottle of wine that had been brought specifically for them, its label one. Bentley had only ever read about. He couldn't focus. The words of the speakers turned into a meaningless drone. The applause was a distant roar. His mind was a maelstrom of rage, jealousy, and a terrifying, unfamiliar feeling of helplessness. How had this happened? The Liliana he knew was quiet, intellectual, and deeply insecure about her place in the world. She was the one who edited his manuscripts, who organized his research, who reminded him of appointments. She was the scaffolding that held up his genius essential, but meant to be unseen. The woman across the room was a different species entirely. She radiated a confidence that came from deep within, a self-possession that no amount of money or fame could buy. It was the one thing he could never give her, because his own confidence was a fragile construct built on external validation. He remembered her writing. Arthur was right. There was a cadence in echoes of a faded dawn that was hers. He'd always told himself he was simply inspired by her, that he was elevating her raw, unformed ideas into true art. He'd read her journals, her abandoned short stories, absorbing her unique way of seeing the world, of phrasing a feeling. He saw it as a collaboration, albeit an uncredited one. He was the artist, she was the muse. But now, looking at the woman she had become, a dark, venomous thought slithered into his mind. What if he had it backwards? What if he was the parasite and she was the host? He pushed the thought away violently. It was absurd. He was the genius. The critics had said so. The next award, the presenter on stage announced, is for the highest honor in American letters, the Golden Quill for fiction. This was it, the main event. Chloe put a reassuring hand on his arm. Breathe, Bentley. This is your moment. No matter what else is happening, this is yours. Bentley straightened his tie and tried to compose his features into an expression of humble anticipation. He felt Isabella's hand cold and clammy find his again. The nominees were read aloud. His name was last met with strong, enthusiastic applause, though it felt muted compared to the buzz that still surrounded Liliana's presence. The camera panned to his face. He smiled a tight, forced grimace he hoped looked genuine. The presenter, a celebrated actress with an Oscar on her mantle, tore open the envelope. The silence stretched thick and heavy. And the golden quill goes to... Bentley held his breath. His entire future, his entire sense of self, hung on the next few words. Catherine Park, for the last embers of winter. The world went white. For a moment there was no sound, only a high-pitched ringing in his ears. The applause that erupted for the other author felt like a physical blow. He saw Catherine Park, a quiet, unassuming woman in her late 60s, gasp and cover her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. Her table erupted in joy. His table was Sant. Chloe's hand fell from his arm. Marcus stared at the stage, his face grim. Isabella simply let go of his hand, her touch retreating as if he were suddenly contagious. Bentley clapped. He had to. He was on camera. The motion was mechanical, wooden. His face felt like a plaster mask that was about to crack. He had lost. On the night his ex-wife had returned from the dead to publicly humiliate him, he had lost. It wasn't just a defeat. It was an annihilation. His eyes against his will were drawn back to Liliana's table. She was politely applauding the winner, a small, serene smile on her face. She hadn't even looked at him. His failure was as irrelevant to her as his success would have been. Damien Blackwood leaned over and offered her his arm. She took it, and together they stood up. They had no reason to stay. They hadn't come for the awards. They had come for something else entirely. As they began to walk towards the exit long before the ceremony was over, they passed his table. For a moment, Liliana was only a few feet away from him. He could smell her perfume, a subtle, complex scent of sandalwood and night-blooming jasmine. Nothing like the simple lavender soap she used to wear. She didn't look at him. She didn't look at Isabella. Her gaze was fixed forward. But as she passed, she turned her head slightly, and her eyes met Isabella's. It was a fleeting look, but it was filled with a universe of meaning. It wasn't a look of triumph or pity. It was a look of profound quiet, almost sorrowful understanding. It was a look that said, "I know him, and I am so sorry you have to learn what I already know." And then she was gone, a phantom of midnight silk and diamonds, leaving a trail of shattered expectations and whispered questions in her wake. Bentley Ashford was left sitting in the glare of the stage lights, a loser at a table of ghosts, the deafening sound of another woman's victory speech echoing in the ruins of his perfect night. The remainder of the awards ceremony was a slow, agonizing torture. Bentley sat through the final speeches and the closing remarks, a frozen smile plastered on his face, while a black hole of rage and humiliation churned in his gut. The air at his table was thick with unspoken condolences and the stench of failure. His agent Marcus avoided his eyes, furiously typing on his phone, likely already in damage control mode. Chloe, his publicist, kept offering him water with a funereal solemnity. Isabella was a statue of ice beside him. She had withdrawn completely, her vibrant energy extinguished. The diamond necklace that had looked so triumphant earlier now seemed like a glittering noose around her neck. She had hitched her wagon to a falling star, and the reality of her predicament was dawning on her in real time, in a ballroom filled with the most influential people in their world. When the ceremony finally ended and the lights came up, a cage of politeness descended. People from other tables began to approach. Tough break, Bentley. Catherine's book was a surprise, but a worthy one. You were robbed, Ashford. Absolutely robbed. Better luck next time. Echoes was a masterpiece. The words were meaningless platitudes, the social lubricant required to move past an awkward moment. Bentley knew what they were really thinking, what they would whisper about the moment they were out of earshot. They weren't just talking about him losing the award, they were talking about him losing everything. He had been publicly upstaged, cuckolded, not by a rival author, but by a titan of industry, and his carefully crafted persona had been shattered. The after-party was being held in an adjacent salon, a swirl of jazz music, clinking glasses and loud relieved chatter. Normally, Bentley would have been in his element here holding court, accepting congratulations. Tonight, the thought of entering that room felt like marching to his own execution. "I'm not going," he said to Marcus, his voice low and tight. "You have to," Marcus insisted, his face strained. "If you disappear, you look weak. You have to go in there, hold your head high, congratulate Catherine Park, and act like you don't have a care in the world. It's the only play we have." Isabella finally spoke, her voice thin and brittle. "I have a headache. I think I'm going to go home." She didn't look at him. She was already detaching, creating distance. "Fine." Bentley snapped his control, fraying. "Go." He didn't care. At that moment, she was just another part of the evening's spectacular failure. She flinched as if he'd struck her, then turned and walked away without another word, melting into the crowd, heading for the coat check. Her retreat was another public wound, another drop of blood in the water, for the sharks to scent. Steeling himself, Bentley followed Marcus towards the after-party. As he stepped through the archway, a wall of noise and forced merriment hit him. He felt intensely conspicuous, as if a spotlight was following him, illuminating his shame. And then he saw them. They hadn't left the hotel. Liliana and Damien Blackwood were in a secluded alcove of the salon speaking with a small select group of people. Bentley recognized them instantly. Michael Linton, the chairman of a major Hollywood studio, and Ari Emanuel, the notoriously powerful CEO of the talent agency WME. This wasn't a social call. This was a business meeting disguised as a casual chat. The sight sent a fresh wave of venom through Bentley's veins. It all clicked into place. This wasn't a random act of revenge. This was a strategic, calculated strike. She hadn't come here just to upstage him. She had used his night, the platform he had built, as a launchpad for her own ambitions. She was leveraging the attention, the buzz, the sheer shock of her appearance with Damien Blackwood to make deals with the most powerful men in entertainment. He couldn't stand it. The injustice, the sheer audacity of it was more than he could bear. His ego, bruised and bleeding, demanded action. He needed to reassert control, to puncture the serene, untouchable bubble she had created around herself. Ignoring Marcus's frantic whispered, "Bentley, don't!" He broke away and began to walk towards the alcove. As he approached, the conversation paused. 4 pairs of intensely powerful eyes turned to him. Michael Linton and Ari Emanuel looked at him with mild professional curiosity. Damien Blackwood's grey eyes were cool and unreadable, as impenetrable as a fortress wall. Liliana's expression was one of mild, weary surprise, as if she were spotting a persistent insect she thought she'd already swatted away. "Bentley," she said, her voice even. There was no warmth in it, just acknowledgement. "Liliana." He began, forcing a smile that felt like a snarl. "I must say I'm surprised to see you. I didn't think literary awards were quite your scene anymore. I pictured you more upstate, with a garden." He gestured vaguely, trying to paint a picture of the quaint, irrelevant life he had imagined for her. Liliana's smile didn't waver. "People change, Bentley, and gardens require patience. It turns out my talents were better suited to a different kind of cultivation." Her eyes flickered briefly towards Damien and the other men. Bentley pressed on, fueled by a desperate need to land a blow. And you've certainly found a powerful benefactor. He let the word hang in the air, weighted with insinuation. He glanced at Damien Blackwood, a direct challenge. Damien, an unexpected pleasure. I wasn't aware you were a connoisseur of modern fiction. Damien Blackwood didn't rise to the bait. He simply inclined his head slightly. I'm a connoisseur of brilliance, Mr. Ashford, in any form it takes. His gaze rested on Liliana with an admiration so genuine it made Bentley's stomach clench. And Liliana is one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. The compliment was delivered with such quiet sincerity that it completely disarmed Bentley's insinuation. It wasn't a boast, it was a statement of fact. Bentley turned his attention back to Liliana, his voice dripping with condescension. Well, I'm glad to see you've landed on your feet. After everything, I was worried. This finally seemed to elicit a flicker of a real emotion from her, a spark of something that looked like pity. You were never worried, Bentley, she said, her voice soft, but carrying a devastating clarity. You were relieved, there's a difference. The truth of it hit him like a punch to the gut. Michael Linton and Ari Emanuel were now watching the exchange with undisguised interest, their predator's instincts sensing a story far more compelling than any manuscript. I only ever wanted what was best for you, Bentley lied, trying to regain his footing. No, Liliana corrected him gently. You only ever wanted what was best for you. You just needed me to believe it was for me. It was a neat trick. For a while. She paused, then delivered the killing blow, a verbal coup de grace. The thing you never understood, Bentley, is that I wasn't the scaffolding holding you up. I was the foundation. And when I left, I took it with me. I just hope for your sake that what you built on top of it isn't as hollow as I suspect it is. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart. She had just articulated his deepest, most terrifying fear and laid it bare in front of these titans of industry. The cadence, she had mentioned the familiar rhythm Arthur Mason had noted. It was all tied up in that one word, hollow. He was speechless. His wit, his arrogance, his entire arsenal of verbal weaponry was gone. He was standing there, exposed and empty-handed. Damien Blackwood stepped forward slightly, a subtle but unmistakable move to end the conversation. Gentlemen, he said to Linton and Emmanuel, his voice calm and commanding, I believe we were discussing the film rights. Film rights. The words barely registered. Bentley. Damien said, his grey eyes finally locking onto his with a chilling intensity. Congratulations on your nomination. It's a significant achievement, to be recognized for your work. It was the most brutal insult of the night. The bland, polite, utterly dismissive congratulations of a superior being. He was swatting Bentley away, not with anger, but with indifference. He was dismissing him as a minor nuisance, a footnote to their far more important conversation. Bentley felt a hot flush of shame so intense it was dizzying. He had come over to reclaim his power to inflict a wound, and instead he had been dismantled piece by piece with surgical precision. He hadn't just lost the battle, he had been erased from the war. He mumbled something incoherent, a pathetic excuse for a retreat, and turned. As he walked away, he heard Ari Emanuel's distinct, gravelly voice pick up the conversation as if he'd never been there. So about the protagonist, Ari said. The story of a woman finding her voice after being silenced. It's powerful. We see a major star in the role. The narrative arc is incredible. Bentley froze. They weren't talking about his book. They were talking about hers, about her life, about the story he had tried so hard to erase. His humiliation was now complete. He was not only the villain in her story, he was a footnote in the lucrative deal being made about it. He stumbled through the crowd blind to the faces deaf to the music and fled the party, escaping into the cold, indifferent New York night. The next morning, Bentley awoke to the aggressive grey light of a New York hangover. His head throbbed in time with the city's distant sirens. The tuxedo from the night before was crumpled in a heap on the floor of his sterile minimalist apartment, an apartment he'd chosen specifically because it was the aesthetic opposite of the warm, cluttered brownstone he had shared with Liliana. Isabella was gone. There was no note, just an empty space on the pillow beside him, and the faint, lingering scent of her perfume, a ghost of his failed triumph. He stumbled to the kitchen and fumbled with the espresso machine, his hands shaking. He needed caffeine, but what he really craved was validation. He needed to see his name in print, to see the narrative of the night spun in his favor. Perhaps some critics would argue he was robbed. Perhaps the focus would be on his literary merits, not the red carpet drama. With a trembling finger, he tapped open the browser on his phone. The New York Times, the arts section. The headline was a punch to the face. Blackwood's surprise appearance at Golden Quills fuels Hollywood speculation. Liliana Mason, ex-wife of nominee Ashford at center of mystery deal. His name was there, but only as a subordinate clause, a piece of identifying information for the real star of the story, Liliana. The article barely mentioned his book or his loss. Instead, it was a breathless piece about Damien Blackwood's unprecedented appearance, accompanied by a stunning photo of him and Liliana. They looked regal, powerful, a modern-day power couple. There was a smaller, unflattering, candid shot of Bentley, caught mid-sentence as he confronted them, his face tight with anger. He looked petty and small. He clicked on another link, a popular culture blog. The headline was even more brutal. Awkward night for author Bentley Ashford as ex-wife steals show with billionaire beau, then he loses top prize. The article was a gleeful blow-by-blow account of his public humiliation. It quoted anonymous sources from the party who described his meltdown and Isabella's hasty exit. It was filled with speculation about Liliana and Damien, painting her as a mysterious phoenix rising from the ashes. He threw his phone across the room. It clattered against the wall and slid to the floor, the screen dark. He was trapped. The narrative was out of his control. He had spent his entire career mastering words, bending them to his will, to create fictions that the world adored. Now, the unassailable truth of reality reported in a million pixels and gallons of ink was crushing him. He paced the apartment like a caged animal, the silence pressing in on him. This was Liliana's doing. It had to be. This was her revenge, meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed. The quiet, mousy woman he thought he knew had been hiding a Machiavellian strategist. But a deeper, more unsettling thought gnawed at him. Liliana's words from the night before echoed in his mind. I was the foundation, and when I left, I took it with me. Hollow. The word clung to him. Driven by a masochistic impulse, he walked into his pristine office. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but they were mostly for show. The real work happened on his sleek iMac. On a stand beside it, propped up like a holy relic, was a hard copy of Echoes of a Faded Dawn. He picked it up. The cover, with his name in bold embossed letters, felt alien in his hands. He opened it to a random page. It was a passage that critics had universally praised for its raw emotional insight into the protagonist's grief. The silence in the house was not an absence of sound, but a presence. It had weight. It settled in the corners like dust clung to the curtains and slept in the hollow of her side of the bed. It was the ghost of a language we no longer spoke, a dialect of sorrow I had to learn to translate alone. He stared at the words. They were beautiful, they were powerful, and they were not his. A memory sharp and unwelcome pierced through the fog of his anger. A winter afternoon, years ago, Liliana curled on the old armchair in their brownstone, a mug of tea steaming beside her. She wasn't writing a novel, just journaling something she did religiously. He'd asked her what she was writing about. Just trying to describe the quiet, she'd said, her voice soft. After my grandmother passed, the silence in her house. It's not empty, you know. It's full. It's like a presence. He had stored that away, that idea, that feeling. He had taken it. He frantically flipped through the book, a cold sweat breaking out on his skin. Page after page, he saw her. Not just her ideas, but her very voice, her unique turn of phrase, the specific, idiosyncratic rhythm of her prose that Arthur Mason had recognized. There was the description of the falling autumn leaves as a slow, rust-colored surrender. That was from a poem she wrote in college and had pinned to the corkboard above her desk for years. There was the protagonist's habit of organizing her books by the emotion they evoked, not by author or genre. That was Liliana's quirky system, something he used to tease her about. The central metaphor of the novel, the echoes of a past life that shaped the present, was the core theme of an unfinished short story. She had let him read a story. She had abandoned after he'd told her it was a little too sentimental, a bit naive. He had lied. He'd seen its potential, its power, and he had discouraged her so he could claim it for himself. He had convinced himself it wasn't theft. It was inspiration. It was alchemy. He was the genius who could take her raw, unrefined emotions and shape them into art. He was the sculptor, and she was the clay. But looking at it now, stripped of his self-delusion, he saw the truth. He was a plagiarist, not of another published author, but of a private life. He had stolen the soul of his own wife and sold it to the world as his own. The book wasn't a masterpiece. It was a meticulously crafted forgery, hollow. The truth was a physical sickness. He stumbled to the bathroom and wrenched his body, trying to expel the poison of his own deceit. When he was done, he gripped the sink, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The man looking back at him was a stranger. His face, which yesterday had seemed handsome and successful, now looked gaunt and haunted. His eyes were filled with a desperate, panicked fear. He finally understood. Liliana's revenge wasn't the public spectacle at the awards night. That was just the opening act. Her true revenge was this moment, this private, solitary reckoning. She didn't need to expose him. She knew that his success was built on a lie so profound that it would eventually consume him from the inside out. She had let him build his gilded cage and then simply walked away, leaving him to realize he was trapped inside it alone. His phone buzzed from the other room. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. A frantic, insistent rhythm. Finally driven by a sliver of desperate hope that it might be Isabella calling to reconcile, he retrieved it from the floor. The screen was cracked, but it lit up with a string of texts from his agent Marcus. "Call me now. A journalist just contacted me. A guy named Marcus Thorne. No, not me, another Marcus. He's asking about your early drafts. He's asking about Liliana's old writings. Someone talked Bentley. He says he has copies of her journals. Bentley, for the love of God, call me. What the hell is going on?" The blood drained from his face. It wasn't just a private reckoning anymore. The ghost he had tried to contain within the pages of his book was breaking free. The foundation Liliana had taken with her was beginning to crumble, and the entire hollow edifice he had built was about to come crashing down on his head. Bentley awoke to the aggressive grey light of a New York hangover. The tuxedo from the night before was a crumpled heap on the floor of his sterile minimalist apartment. Isabella was gone. There was no note, only an empty space on the pillow beside him, a ghost of his failed triumph. He stumbled to the kitchen, his hands shaking, bypassing the espresso machine for his phone. He needed to see the narrative to find some spin that might salvage his pride. He found none. The headlines were a public execution. The New York Times, Blackwood's surprise appearance at Golden Quills. Fuels Hollywood speculation. Liliana Mason, ex-wife of nominee Ashford at center of mystery deal. His name was a footnote. A culture blog was more brutal. Awkward night for author Bentley Ashford as ex-wife steals show with billionaire beau, then he loses top prize. The article featured an unflattering candid of him confronting Liliana, his face tight with anger, making him look petty and small. He hurled the phone across the room, the clatter of its impact, a pathetic echo in the vast, silent apartment. The narrative was out of his control. He paced the room like a caged animal, Liliana's words from the party ringing in his ears. I was the foundation, and when I left, I took it with me. Hollow. The word clung to him. Drawn by a masochistic impulse, he walked into his office. There on its stand, like a holy relic, was a copy of Echoes of a Faded Dawn. He picked it up, the cover with his name in bold letters, feeling alien in his hands. He opened it to a random page, a passage praised by critics for its raw emotional insight. The silence in the house was not an absence of sound, but a presence. It had weight. It settled in the corners like dust. A dialect of sorrow I had to learn to translate alone. He stared at the words. They were beautiful, and they were not his. A memory pierced through his anger, sharp and unwelcome. Liliana, years ago, curled in an armchair, telling him about the quiet in her grandmother's house after she passed. It's not empty, she had said. It's full. It's like a presence. He had taken it. He had taken her grief and called it his genius. Frantically, he flipped through the book, a cold sweat on his skin. Page after page, he saw her phrasing, her metaphors, her soul. The protagonist's habit of organizing books by the emotion they evoked. That was Liliana's quirky system. The central theme of Echoes was from an unfinished story he'd told her was naive, so he could mine it for himself. He had convinced himself it was alchemy, that he was the artist elevating her raw material. But stripped of his self-delusion, he saw the truth. He was a plagiarist, not of a book, but of a life. The masterpiece wasn't his creation. It was a forgery of his wife's soul, hollow. The truth was a physical sickness. He stumbled to the bathroom and wrenched his body, trying to expel the poison of his own deceit. He gripped the sink, staring at his reflection. The man looking back was a stranger, his face gaunt and haunted. He finally understood Liliana's true revenge. It wasn't the public spectacle. It was this private, solitary reckoning. She had let him build his gilded cage and then simply walked away, leaving him to realize he was trapped inside it alone. His phone buzzed from the other room, a frantic, insistent rhythm. He retrieved it from the floor. The screen was cracked, but lit up with texts from his agent, Marcus. Call me now. A journalist just contacted me. Marcus Thorne. He's asking about your early drafts. He's asking about Liliana's old writings. He says he has copies of her journals. Someone talked Bentley. Bentley, for the love of God, call me. The blood drained from his face. This journalist wasn't a gossip columnist. He was a career ender. Bentley dialed, his hands slick. Tell me this is a joke, he whispered. I wish I could. Marcus's voice was grim. This guy Thorne has scans of Liliana's journals. He read me passages over the phone. They were verbatim Bentley. The silence in the house was not an absence of sound, but a presence. That exact line. He's giving us 24 hours to comment before he publishes. There was a damning pause. Is it true? Bentley's silence was his confession. Jesus Christ, Marcus breathed. We're done. My agency can't be associated with this. I'll release a pro forma denial, but after that, you're on your own. The line went dead. The final door of his professional life slammed shut. As if on cue, he heard a key in the lock. Isabella stepped inside, not with the hesitant air of a returning lover, but with the grim purpose of an undertaker. She carried an empty tote bag. Isabella, he began. Don't, she said, holding up a hand. She walked past him to the bedroom and began methodically collecting her things. What are you doing? He asked, his voice cracking. She faced him, her eyes clear and cold, all adoration replaced by a profound disappointment. Last night, she said, when she looked at me, your ex-wife, she didn't look angry. She looked sorry for me. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. She knew who you were, and she knew I was about to find out. A bitter laugh escaped her. I was such a fool. I believed it all, the genius, the masterpiece. I thought I was part of your story, but I was just a prop you used to hurt her. That's not true. He pleaded the words, sounding false even to him. Isn't it? She replied, her voice soft with a sad finality. You don't love me, Bentley. You love how I made you feel. You love the reflection I showed you. But the man in that reflection isn't real. She zipped her bag and walked to the door. Is the book a misunderstanding, Bentley? She asked, her voice laced with a final chilling question. Or is it just the one lie you finally got caught telling? She didn't wait for an answer. She walked out, closing the door gently behind her. The soft click echoed the one from his phone call. He was utterly alone now, stripped of his award, his reputation, his agent, and his lover. He was just a hollow man in an empty apartment, waiting for the world to learn the truth. The story broke, not with a bang, but with the devastating precision of a surgeon's scalpel. Marcus Thorne's article in The Atlantic, titled "The Echo in the Room," laid Bentley's literary theft bare. It wasn't an accusation, it was an autopsy. Side-by-side comparisons of Liliana's private journals and Bentley's published prose were irrefutable. The piece was impeccably researched, quoting old friends who remembered Liliana's unique voice, and even her father Arthur Mason, who simply stated, "My daughter is, and always has been, a brilliant woman. I'm glad the world is finally getting a glimpse of it." The professional fallout was immediate and absolute. Sterling and Ross halted all printing of Echoes of a Faded Dawn. The Golden Quill Committee officially rescinded his nomination, and his name became toxic overnight. Bentley retreated into a self-imposed darkness in his apartment, a ghost in the life he'd built, haunted by the constant, silent pulse of notifications on his phone, each one another nail in his career's coffin. In stark contrast, Liliana Mason's star ascended. She remained elegantly silent on the scandal itself, a move that amplified her dignity. Her power move came a week later with the announcement of a major media deal. At its heart was her own memoir, its title, A Quiet, Brilliant Reclamation, A Different Kind of Dawn. She gave a single, poised television interview. She spoke with profound intelligence about the journey of finding one's own truth and the silencing of creative voices, but never once uttered Bentley's name. He was simply a chapter I have closed. Bentley watched from his darkened living room, finally understanding. Her power didn't come from Damian Blackwood or public revenge. It came from the unshakable confidence of someone who had survived a fire and knew with absolute certainty who she was. Months bled into a bleak winter. Bentley's finances collapsed under the weight of his disgrace. He was forced to sell the apartment, his art, and his designer furniture, the props for a life that was no longer his. He moved into a small, anonymous room, a nobody in a city that had once worshipped him. One afternoon, he saw her book displayed in a shop window. The cover was a simple, powerful photograph of Liliana, her gaze direct and strong. It was a #1 bestseller. With the last of his cash, he bought a copy and sat on a park bench, reading the final chapter. Her words were not for him, but they struck him with the force of a final judgment. "Some have called my story one of revenge," she wrote. "It is not. Revenge is a conversation with the past. I am only interested in a conversation with the future. Justice is not about punishing those who wronged you. It is about building a life so full and true that their chapter becomes an insignificant footnote. The greatest power is not to destroy, but to create." Bentley closed the book. A cold, single tear traced a path through his unshaven cheek. It was a tear of pure annihilation. She hadn't just defeated him, she had transcended him entirely. He was the footnote, a faded echo. He was left with nothing but the truth in a profound and empty silence, the utter absence of the man he had pretended to be. And so the curtain falls on Bentley Ashford, a man who flew too close to a sun he did not create. His story serves as a chilling reminder that success built on deceit is a house of cards destined to collapse under the weight of truth. It wasn't the public spectacle or the loss of a trophy that destroyed him. It was the quiet, undeniable power of a voice he tried to silence. Liliana Mason didn't seek revenge in the traditional sense. Her victory was far more profound. She reclaimed her narrative, her art, and her life, proving that the most powerful spotlight is the one that shines from within. What did you think of Liliana's ultimate triumph? Was it poetic justice or something more? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below.